Here they come. Get ready. Let's go.
The plan had been to regroup at the hideaway. Keith, Carolyn, and Ryan were already on their way back here when I called to tell them what had happened. So when they pulled up, it was only to retrieve us and then keep going. The building was compromised now. Dead bodies will do that to a place, as we learned earlier that day at Joe's Diner. Even before the van had come to a complete stop, the side door was sliding back and the wheelchair ramp folding down. Listeners may recall me mentioning this feature of the vehicle back in Season 1, and that it was necessary in order to transport Hardesty. He, like the bard after which he'd patterned his newer vessel, did not walk upon legs, but rolled about on a sizable sphere. This was enclosed by a dome chassis into which was mounted a telescoping column. That was, in turn, attached to a half-torso. Socketed into either side of this were long, multi-jointed arms, and surmounting the body was the head. It was here, above the ocular sensors, that we could see the illuminated organ of our companion through a similar porthole to that on the brain box. I remind you of all this, listener, because it made Hardesty incredibly conspicuous. We had to keep him out of sight, so he was the first to dart from the building to the awaiting van. He moved onto the ramp, then collapsed his robotic body. Once he was compact enough to fit, he quickly rolled inside. The ramp folded back into place and the side door closed as Joseph and I made our own furtive approach. We had to enter through the rear hatch. We tossed our weapons in ahead of us, then crawled over the back bench, only to find our seats partially occupied by the repository, the cabinet lying awkwardly across the length of the van's interior.
I thought you guys were getting rid of this thing.
Yeah, you're not the only ones who hit a snag tonight. The place I had in mind didn't really work out, so we gotta find somewhere else to stash the repository now.
We have slightly more pressing matters. Can we deal with the repository later?
No, it has to be now. This is like driving around town with a bomb.
If this city is about to get as crazy as Hardesty says it will, which, based on what just happened to you guys, it is, we need to get this box of horrors somewhere where it can't add to the chaos.
We need somewhere safe.
I have the perfect place, obviously.
We're not using your vault. Lindsay said on the phone that Five Coat followed you from the bank.
She also told you that he was working alone. All of Heartland is concentrated downtown, like Piper said.
It's still a no-go, Mr. Leck. I don't trust it. Too many people know about the bank.
You're more right than you know, Keith.
Huh?
Never mind. We need a place where no one will go.
Like, ever.
Actually, I think I know where we can take it.
Oh, you mean yeah, that's a great idea.
What is?
Take this next left here, Keith.
This is the Endless Elsewhere podcast, Chapter 14, The Tolling of Bells. Joseph directed Keith to the same place he'd parked his truck at the end of Season 2, back when we moved the bard out of the cavern. It had occurred to me that a now tenantless subterranean cave with a secret entrance was the best possible place for the repository, better even than the undisclosed location to which we transplanted the bard. Having come as close as we could in a vehicle, our group had to go the rest of the way on foot. Without a word, we grabbed our gear and started off. Fortunately, we had the cover of darkness to work in, but still, the risk of being spotted remained high. In order to get back to the former Pendergast estate, we had to use a lengthy branch of the rail trail, so night joggers and dog walkers could be a problem for a group of people who had in their company a robot, now carrying a cabinet of haunted artifacts. It's such a weird life I live. We crossed paths with no other soul along the way, thankfully, and eventually our group reached the point where we could finally get off the trail. We now moved through the woods. Joseph and I had been back to the old Pendergast property twice before since removing the bard, so we knew the way pretty well. During the day, anyway. We'd never come here at night, and the darkness that we had appreciated while on the rail trail was now decidedly unhelpful. I lamented having not brought flashlights when Hardesty, remembering that the rest of us could not see in the dark as apparently he could, activated a pair of spotlights on his vessel. These disclosed from hidden compartments on his shoulders and perfectly illuminated our path. He'd engineered his robotic vessel to be as capable as possible. It was like having a Swiss Army knife as a companion.
Out of curiosity, Herr Leck, where did you and Miss Mallyn place the bard?
He's still here in the city. That's about all I can say.
I should very much like to meet my forebear.
Before too long, Hardesty.
Here we are. You guys continue on into that clearing up ahead, then to the top of the hill. Wait there for the door to open.
Okay, and where will you be?
I've got to go unlock it.
The rest of our party did as I said, Joseph coming with me to the fountain. I gave him my Basilard and shield, then my field recorder and phone, and finally my jacket and boots once I'd pulled them all off. I'd made this swim a couple of times now, none being as cold or as frightening as that first one. Still, Joseph fretted over my safety. I smiled and pulled him down for a kiss, then took a deep breath and dove into the fountain. Beneath the surface plunged a deep shaft that adjoined to a passageway at the bottom, which in turn connected to another shaft that led up to an identical fountain inside the cavern. But I'm sure you remember all that, listener. From this second pool, I burst a moment later. Gulping a few breaths, I then crawled out, soaking in the frigid subterranean air. I knew right where the control board was, even in this pitch black. I promptly activated the heaters and lights, then the hatch at the top of the hill. As the aperture opened, I moved over to the spiral staircase that rose up to it and watched as Hardesty descended from the ceiling of the cavern. The steps had been designed wider and more sloped than usual, to accommodate the bard once upon a time, and because Hardesty's own robotic vessel mirrored Pendergast's creation, it was as if the staircase had been made for him specifically. Even while burdening the repository, Hardesty alighted with ease. He then carried it to the center of the cavern, setting the cabinet down among the other furnishings in what I described last season as the living area. Joseph had brushed past the others to be the next one in, having run from the fountain to the clearing, then up the hill and down into the cavern. My partner had 2 big armfuls of my things and brought them all back to me. He set aside everything but my jacket, which he then threw around my shoulders and rubbed, trying to warm me up. Atop the pile of my personal items lying at our feet, I glanced at the field recorder and saw that it was still running. I looked from it to Joseph.
I'm okay, really.
It's too bad you didn't leave any of Adelaide's clothes here, to change into.
Actually, I did leave one thing.
Oh, really? I thought you took everything.
I didn't think I'd ever be able to wear it. I took up my boots, then went to retrieve the garment in question. I pulled it from the old wardrobe, then went with it behind the changing screen. I heard the others making their way slowly down the spiral staircase, trying to take the place in. Eventually, they assembled around Joseph and Hardesty. I listened to their conversation as I got changed.
Oh yes, here will do nicely.
So, this is the old Pendergast place, huh?
The only surviving portion, anyway.
And the power, it's all self-sufficient?
It'll run pretty much forever.
Pendergast Cosmic Ray Machine. Ah, bask in it, my friends. You stand among greatness.
Those vents up there.
We learned that the place also has an air filtration system. It pipes oxygen down from the surface, but cleans it up before releasing it into the chamber.
Like a bomb shelter.
Basically, yeah.
Good to know.
I imagine it's a little nicer than Sylvester Jurgen's.
Oof. Yeah, that takes me back.
For those who have read The Endless Elsewhere Volume 1, you'll understand this reference to when Joseph and Keith first met. By the time they'd finished their trip down memory lane, I had wriggled out of my wet clothes, then into the dry garment. Now I was lacing up my boots and pulling my jacket on, both of which were leather and black. I only bother mentioning this because they didn't exactly complement the frilly pearl white gown I now wore. This was Adelaide's wedding dress, which I'd found last season but left behind for obvious reasons. I came out from behind the changing screen, looking ridiculous and knowing it, especially with my wet hair and streaked mascara. Everyone turned to me with either a smirk or raised eyebrows. Everyone, that is, but my partner. The look on that man's face. You want to know why I love Joseph? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but one of them is the way he looks at me. He always makes me feel
beautiful.
What? I look terrible.
No, my dear, you do not.
I smiled at the compliment and playfully bobbed a curtsy in my new dress. Our companions offered up a chorus of groans. Joseph and I often get that reaction from people. The pair of us are very different in personality, but neither one of us is cynical by nature or jaded by society, and so the relationship that we have made together is unrepressed and unabashed. And yes, groan-worthy in its sappiness.
What was that?
Did it come from the repository?
Let's have a look.
Tolliver, wait.
Gang away, suckers.
Get away from me.
Don't let it touch you.
Get it!
No, stop, don't touch it. No physical contact.
It has something.
The devil doll had escaped from his cage and leapt from the cabinet, scampering across the cave floor. In his hands was a bottle, an antique of blown glass with a cork, like what you'd see peddled from an apothecary in olden times. Inside sloshed a mysterious blue liquid. The devil doll had grabbed this from the repository on his way out.
Whoa, easy with that there.
You know what this does, right, Keith?
I do. How about you just hand it over there, little fella?
I've been in that cage for so long. I'm so thirsty.
No, don't.
The devil doll uncorked, then upended the bottle, pouring the contents into his yapping little mouth. Now, whether he actually drank the mystery tonic in the traditional sense, or whether it just soaked into the wood and stuffing of his body, I can't really say. I didn't even know what it was that he just swigged down.
That bottle, what was in it?
Well, it's sort of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of potion elixir serum thingy.
So it turns a person into a monster?
Basically.
And what does it do to a possessed doll?
Well, I think we're about to find out.
The little thing was convulsing violently now. From this horrid blur came the sounds of cracking wood and even some faint traces of smoke. I thought the creature might burst into flames from all the friction, but regrettably he did not. Once the transformation was complete, well, the devil doll more closely resembled his name. He'd sprouted horns and fangs and claws and even a little tail. The eyes of the creature were the worst, most frightening alteration. They flickered a sulfurous blue. Even though he'd remained the same size, the whole of our group shrank back from the devil doll. Not so much because of his new infernal appearance. No, it was his lowered voice. Formerly high-pitched, it had dropped to a demonic register.
I feel so difficult. What? Is that my voice? I sound awesome. I look awesome, too. Oh, by the way, you guys are dead.
Hardesty, grab it. You're the only one who can.
Got you.
Keith had said not to touch the devil doll. Even before its beastly change, direct physical contact between the thing and a person could be deadly. That's why Keith had called on Hardesty to subdue the little creature, because Hardesty is not in the strictest terms a person. My partner is, however. Thankfully, I didn't have to find out what specific harm the devil doll causes, as Joseph had had the presence of mind to put his gauntlets back on before seizing the devil doll. He gripped the thing in his armored hands and held it fast.
Hardesty, you got a blowtorch in there somewhere?
Leck? I understand you. Miss Mallyn, bring your shield at once.
What are you?
Stand behind your partner. Now cover his face and yours.
I didn't know what the two of them were thinking, but I did as instructed. Before Hardesty moved in front of my shield and out of sight, I saw the nozzle of a torch extend from behind a panel in his left arm, a short yet intense jet of flame igniting there an instant later. Like I said, Swiss Army knife. Hardesty then applied the torch to Joseph's gauntlets. Sparks erupted, but the shield kept them from Joseph and I. Now I understood what they had intended. Hardesty welded the metal gloves together, fusing them around the devil doll, making the grip Joseph had on the little creature a permanent one. At Hardesty's signal, and before the heat could reach his hands, Joseph slipped free of the gauntlets. They, along with the monster they clutched, fell and clanged against the cave floor all as one piece now. I moved the shield aside, and Hardesty rolled backward. We all looked down to the devil doll, who could scarcely even squirm in his still smoldering restraints.
You guys are the worst.
Well done, everybody.
How did it even get out?
It had to be Grindle, right? Or the other guy.
Huh?
Keith, what was his name?
Leonard Dyer.
Yeah, you said he broke into the church and then smashed the gin jar.
Oh, so maybe he freed the devil doll too, or Grindle did after he took Dyer's body.
Right.
Why would Dyer or Grindle even bother releasing him, though?
Why do you think? To sabotage us.
No, that can't be it. We saw the devil doll still in his cage after Grindle took Dyer.
How about we ask him? Is what they're saying true?
We all looked down at the devil doll for his response. There were still wisps of smoke radiating from the mass of metal around him, which further amplified his new hellish appearance. The devil doll threw his head back and glared up at us with those sulphurous eyes.
Not that it matters, but no, Grindle did not set me free. Even after I set him free, the jerk.
What do you mean?
I knew it wasn't one of you opening the door, so I went still and quiet. I watched as Dyer took the gin jar out. He just stared at it. Finally, he shook his head and started to put it back, so I spoke to him.
You scared him so that he'd drop the gin jar.
It's like you said, Collector. Dyer had come to offer himself to Grindle, but he was about to chicken out. I just made sure he followed through.
You're a turd, you know that?
So you thought Grindle would set you free after he'd taken Leonard Dyer's body?
Yeah, I thought he'd help me out. You know, one possessing spirit to another. But he just looked at me and walked off.
Then how did you get free?
It was Keith who let me out.
Keith?
Well, of course I did. Oh, Oh, you know, I actually think I might have.
Why?
I guess it must have been when I dropped the cabinet earlier. I was trying to move it on my own when you guys kept calling about Piper. So when I finally answered, I lost my grip. Guess the cage must have broken open when it fell.
So, to be clear, Grindel did not let this thing out. That's interesting.
Why is that interesting, Herr Leck?
There's something we haven't told you guys. Grindel came to see us yesterday. He found the bank, broke in, and was waiting for us.
Why haven't you told us this?
We weren't trying to keep it from you, we just didn't really have the chance to tell you until now.
So did he attack you, or what?
He wants to, team up.
Okay, sure.
You're serious?
Grindel listened to Season 2 of the podcast after he got out. When he learned that the Cabal was making their move on Circle City, he realized things had changed. He's as much their enemy as we are, and now we find out that he had a chance to sabotage us but didn't. He also warned Lindsay and I that the bank was being watched. And it was, by Five Coat.
All of which are great ways to gain someone's trust when you're trying to deceive them. I had said this directly to Joseph, which told everyone else in our group that my partner and I were in disagreement about how to proceed with Grindel's offer.
Wait, were you actually considering this?
Desperate times and all that.
But you're against it, right, Lindsay?
I am, yes.
Dude, you need to listen to your lady.
I don't know.
You don't know what, Keith?
Grindel's a stone-cold piece of crap. No one's arguing that. But he's got a lot of power at his disposal.
Please tell me you're joking.
Do you have any friends you're not telling us about, Carolyn? Ryan? Somebody you guys can call to back us up? Not sure if you've noticed or not, but there's not so many of us left in the Cabal. Well, the Cabal have an army.
Keith, really though?
Thank you for seeing my point, Keith.
Hardesty, where do you land on this? You more than any of us know how dangerous he is. Could we really trust Grindel?
I agree with Herr Sorrels and Leck. We must consider Grindel's offer in this most desperate of times.
And with that, our little team was split right down the middle. 3 for, 3 against. But then an outside voice decided to weigh in on the matter.
Well, I hope he kills all of you.
I think I've had just about enough of you. I stooped, threading the tip of my blade into one of the gauntlets. I then lifted the little mass of possessed dummy in medieval armor, carrying it to the repository. Keith rushed ahead to pull the door open for me, and then swung it shut once I made the deposit. This done, I looked to the bastard in my hand, then to my partner. He no longer had his gauntlets, and that made me no longer want my own weapon. Besides, like his, mine could serve a better purpose now. Hardesty rolled over to join us, and I gave him my bastard, asking him to run it through the frame of the cabinet's door as only he had the strength to do. Being smaller than a sword, yet longer than a dagger, it just so happened to be the perfect length to pin the repository closed. Forever. All those cursed artifacts the Unclosing Eye Detective Agency had rounded up in their years of service to Circle City were now trapped and would remain so. I considered leaving my shield behind as well. It seemed fitting to do so since this was the very place from which we'd taken it, but I knew the armor should be returned to its rightful owner, and soon. I returned to the control board and shut off the power, making an abyss of the cavern once more. Hardesty activated his lights so that our group could find our way up the spiral staircase. We reassembled at the top of the hill, now back in the cool night air. Instead of properly closing the hatchway from within, Hardesty forced it closed from the outside, then crushed the hinges. While Carolyn and I dragged the sod back into place, Joseph, Keith, and Ryan went into the woods to cover the fountain with as much forest debris as they could. We hid the entryways, trying to prevent discovery of the cavern even by accident. With a little luck, the repository would sit down there in the darkness until the end of time. As for us, we headed to the cabinet's former home. With nowhere else to turn, the old church was our last available refuge. The drive across town was more than enough time for both Joseph and I to fall asleep in the back of the van. We stirred when Keith parked and shut off the engine. Carolyn and Ryan stepped out first to have a look around, to make sure we were truly alone. This confirmed, the pair of them unlocked those cellar doors, clearing the way for Hardesty, who then went down the wheelchair ramp. He rolled swiftly inside, descending into the basement. The rest of us followed closely behind. Keith paused to close and lock the doors behind him, then, rejoining the group, led us upstairs. Joseph and I had been to this church twice before, but only ever in the basement, so we were seeing the sanctuary for the first time. It had the classic layout, double doors that opened on an aisle that ran between 2 rows of pews and up to a low stage where stood the pulpit. The hardwood floor was faded, the arched windows cracked, the vaulted ceiling was water-stained. The sanctuary was aged, dilapidated, and in every possible way, good enough. This is where we'd be sleeping, Keith informed us. The church kept bedding on hand to accommodate the homeless. Now it was our little transient band that needed shelter. I could tell the Unclosing Eye Detective Agency had hunkered down here before by how quickly they made little beds for themselves on the pews. Joseph and I did our best to imitate them. Hardesty, who had outgrown the human necessity for sleep, stood guard over us. I pulled my shield over me, then the blanket, thinking that if I covered myself in both, I would feel safe enough to sleep. In the back of the van, I'd had Joseph's arm around me for that. As exhausted as I was, rest didn't come easily. I thought about my day. This morning, Joseph and I had gone over the third manuscript and beyond. That long conversation seemed so far away now, considering all that had transpired since. It was afternoon by the time we left the bank for the radio station and listened to one of Kadera's old shows. After that, it was off to the water tower, then to the diner, where we were nearly killed. This is when my partner and I made the return to the bank, now joined by Piper. We'd called the detective agency over and listened as our friend, the secret agent, provided us with all kinds of revelations. This evening, we'd taken Piper to meet Callista and were chased back to the hideaway where Operative Fivecoat met a gruesome end. And lastly, now very late into the night, our group had taken the repository to the old Pendergast estate, securing it in the cavern. It had been a very, very long day. Everything was happening so fast. Maybe it was lying here like one of the homeless, but I thought back to that doomsday prophet, Silas, Joseph had called him, and the sign that he carried, to the end of the age we speed ourselves. This podcast has certainly seen prophecies fulfilled, and it was far from done. It felt like we were coming to some kind of end or change or rebirth or something. All I really knew for sure was that the sun had set on one day and was dawning on another. In fact, it dawned through the windows of that old church, warming, then waking me early the next morning. I sat up and looked around, bleary-eyed and confused. Remembering where I was and why, I turned to where Joseph had been sleeping and found my partner already up, already smiling. Apparently nowadays I switch on the field recorder with as much conscious thought as it takes to breathe. I don't remember doing so, just hearing this conversation later. What is it? Why are you smiling?
It's going to be a good day.
I laughed, sure that he must be joking. Our situation was anything but good, and this new day, while beautifully illuminating the old sanctuary, held no more promise than yesterday. Probably less so with how things were going. But still, my partner smiled, and I wouldn't try to take that away from him. I yawned, stretched, then twisted to survey the other pews, seeing only blankets and pillows where our friends had been. Nor was our night watchman to be seen. Where is everyone?
Hardesty's downstairs, Carolyn and Ryan are in the foyer, and Keith went on a supply run.
Supply run?
Gather round, everyone. I come bearing coffee and donuts.
Breakfast of champions.
It's got the two most important food groups, caffeine and sugar. Everything a ragtag group of plucky freedom fighters need to start their day. Mr. Leck, I brought you 2 coffees.
Oh, you are truly a king among men.
Yes, I am.
As everyone converged on Keith, I checked my phone and saw that I had a text message from Sylvia. I quickly responded to it, then joined my companions. Joseph and I typically grab meals between recordings, but there had been much less of that going on for obvious reasons. Realizing that I was famished, I grabbed more than 1 donut. Hardesty came up from the basement and rolled to the front of the sanctuary, where we'd gathered to discuss our options and formulate some kind of a plan. We'd only just begun to strategize when the front door opened. I, for one, startled at the sound. Before I wondered who it could be, I wondered why Keith had not locked the door behind him. I had my answer soon enough. It was certainly a stranger who came up the aisle to join our group, but I did know this much. He was no enemy. How did I know? Well, he wore a t-shirt with a logo from a popular podcast. I eyed him curiously. It was a middle-aged man with graying hair and kind eyes who now stood among us. He exchanged warm, casual greetings with everyone in the Unclosing Eye Detective Agency, even Hardesty. This, then, must be the pastor of the church, whom Keith had described as their ally back in Season 1. He turned to Joseph and I, formally introducing himself as Reverend Aidan Wright, a name with which we were both already vaguely familiar. He was less of a stranger than I had thought. The coffee hadn't quite kicked in just yet, so we couldn't place how we knew him. The man was good enough to explain.
Ms. Mallyn, you may know me from a story that I once called into your show, and Mr. Leck, you may know me from yet another story of mine that I mailed to you.
Yes, yours was one of the more recent ones, right? That showed up in my P.O. box at the end of our first season?
Quite so. I'm a fan, obviously.
The Reverend smiled, then glanced down at his t-shirt.
Do good, fight evil, repeat? Oh, I just love that.
So, how did you meet all these guys?
Oh, that's a rather complicated series of events, I'm afraid. They first came to me, you see, then I to them. My part in their story began shortly after the attack at the diner.
Come on. Piper just dredged all of this up yesterday. Do we really have to go over it again? It's not exactly something I want to listen to.
Yours is a story of redemption, Miss Pelfrey. You are an inspiration.
Why do you have to make everything sound so nice, Reverend?
So this was back when Carolyn was still a cultist and Keith a cop. She and her people tried to kill him and his partner for investigating them.
Indeed. They failed, obviously, and fled down the street to the cemetery. There was a shootout in the mausoleum, and lives were lost. Carolyn escaped, however, and was found hiding in a crypt the next day by Ryan here, who at this time still worked there as a groundskeeper. He knew Carolyn from a previous clash, because of which he realized that she needed help of a very specific kind, a spiritual kind.
Carolyn had offered her body to a spirit and become a demoniac.
Right. You showed me a video in Season 1 about this. Ryan brought Carolyn to a church seeking an exorcism for her. That was this church, Reverend?
It was, but I did not help them, as I should have. You see, the diner shooting was all over the news by then, and I recognized the girl Ryan had brought to my door, so I called the police instead. Carolyn was arrested as Ryan fled out the back. I would have told the police about him, but I realized the mistake that I had made. Ryan had been right.
Yeah, I was.
How did you know?
It was the fight that Carolyn gave the police when they arrived. Well, I should say the fight her demon gave them. Then I knew that I had utterly failed this young woman.
What did you do?
I kept track of the story through the news. There was soon a report about a hospital chaplain, a man named Arvin Reyes, who'd abducted Carolyn from police custody. I would later learn that Ryan had recruited this man for the exorcism that she needed. This accomplished, Ryan escaped with Carolyn, but Chaplain Reyes was arrested, tried, and sentenced to a term in prison. All of this was thoroughly documented in a story that Mr. Leck here published some time ago. Well, guilt-ridden as I was for having turned them away, I visited Reyes in prison to confirm the story. Then I knew that I had to make up for my lapse in judgment. I sought them out, but by the time I'd found them, the Unclosing Eye Detective Agency had been formed. Carolyn already belonged to it, Ryan joined later, whereas I closed the doors of this church to them before. Now, I opened them wide. I offered the agency use of the basement, and now, it seems the sanctuary as well.
And you were okay with them putting the repository down there? It was incredibly dangerous, and this is a functioning church.
Oh, we didn't put it there. The repository was already in the basement. We just made use of it.
Oh, really? So where did it come from?
Oh, this church sat vacant for many decades before I reopened it. You will remember me saying so in my call to your show, Miss Mallyn? Well, I found the cabinet in the basement. In researching it, I discovered the repository's origin and what made it special, as well as the chain of events that brought it here. I covered them all in the story that I sent to your P.O. box, Mr. Leck.
Your story was very compelling, Reverend. I'll include it in my second volume if I can ever find the time to get it published. I do have a question or two about it, though. You said the repository was...
Lindsay? Hello?
Sylvia had texted me that she needed to talk, in person, so I'd sent her my whereabouts. I'd done so first thing upon waking, before I was able to give it much thought, and then promptly forgot about it. So I was yet again startled by the front door opening. Sylvia came in with a backpack over her shoulder. Sylvia! Hi! What is all that you have?
What are you wearing?
It's a long story.
What is she doing here?
Sorry, I should have told you she was on her way.
No, what you should have done was keep our secret location a secret.
What? Your friend here is invited, but not mine?
Yeah, the Reverend isn't being watched, but Miss Flores, well, she likely is. She's tied to the station, the podcast, and to you personally. If they've learned what happened at the diner, or even at the hideaway, Heartland Security probably put eyes on your producer.
I don't think I was followed. I mean, we're out here in the sticks, with no one around. I would have noticed if I was being tailed.
That wasn't good enough for Keith. With a nod, he sent Carolyn and Ryan to the windows, then made his way to the front door. They spent a few minutes watching, waiting for any sign that we were not alone. Even though they saw nothing amiss, none of them were convinced of our safety. Their time spent in hiding had made them necessarily paranoid. Eventually, the three of them relented and rejoined the group.
Hardesty, put your eyes in the sky.
I shall, Herr Sorrels.
Eyes in the sky?
Don't worry about it. Miss Flores, I'm going to ask you to stay right here for a while, just until we can make sure the coast is actually clear.
We can't hold her here, Keith.
No, it's fine, Lindsay. We have a lot to discuss. Privately.
The church was small, so the only place we could go to speak was downstairs. Once we were alone, Sylvia removed the backpack and handed it to me. I was surprised by the weight.
Ugh, it's hefty.
Okay, you got 2 new field recorders in there, about a dozen spare batteries, and one of those new solar charger gizmos. There's also a decent studio mic and a collapsible sound shield.
Sound shield?
It's pretty cool, actually. It's made of a high-density absorbent foam for studio work on the move. Anyway, there's a laptop with editing software, obviously, and our entire library of music. Plus, there's...
Sylvia, why did you bring me all this?
I got it from the station.
I didn't know they had all this.
They don't. Not anymore. I stole it. They kicked us out today. We're now officially on our own.
Oh.
That's why I didn't text you back last night. I was a little beside myself. And I figured you were in the thick of something. I didn't want to throw gasoline on a fire.
I see.
But we're going to finish what we started, right? That's why I'm here, Lindsay. And, to make sure you're okay.
I grabbed my friend and hugged her.
Thank you, Sylvia.
You're welcome. Hey, let's get you one of these new field recorders. That one is looking a little worse for wear.
Nah, I love this thing. We've been through a lot together.
Don't I know it. But that tape holding the battery in place is new.
Yeah, I dropped it yesterday when a couple of guys tried to shoot us.
Excuse me?
I have a lot to tell you.
Tell it to the mic. We can set up down here. We need to go over what you've recorded so far and write up narrations for it. We'll keep making the episodes as we go. We should probably do the season 2 recap while we're at it, just to be safe. Seriously though, retire that field recorder. It looks like it will stop working any time now.
It still has some life left in it. I just needed to go a little farther. Just a little farther.
I don't like the way you're talking, Lindsay.
Just make me a promise, okay? If something happens, like to me, that is, put the show out regardless. Whatever goes down, tell the world. Everyone must know, or all that we've done will be for nothing.
I promise, Lindsay. Now let's get to work.
Sylvia and I spent most of that day working on the podcast. Until this point, we had only recorded narrations for the first episode of this season, what'll be Chapter 11. Depending on how all this gets cut together later, we recorded voiceovers for Chapters 12 and 13, probably parts of this one as well. Like the bedding, Reverend Wright kept plenty of food on hand for the homeless, to which we were also welcomed. But even with a couple of proper meals and the sleep I'd gotten last night, I eventually hit the wall. It may not seem as though mere speaking could be so tiring, but I assure you, listener, it's a lot of work. Sylvia, being a good producer, forced me away from the mic to give my voice a break. I grabbed my field recorder and headed upstairs as Sylvia edited my narrations. Everyone but Joseph was still in the sanctuary, mulling over the options available to us. From the sound of things, there weren't many. I met the Reverend's eyes and he nodded to the front door, telling me that Joseph had stepped outside. I found my partner behind the church where he could stay out of sight.
Hey, how's it going?
Not bad. Giving the old pipes a rest.
Yeah, you've been at it for hours.
I found my usual place to stand at Joseph's side and pressed myself against him as he draped an arm around me. I looked up at him. That same smile from this morning was there again. Or still there, maybe. I'm not sure it had actually left him.
You said it was going to be a good day. How do you know?
Because we started it together. Any morning I wake up with you, well, it's gonna be a good day.
That's very sweet, Joseph.
I'm very glad that you're my girlfriend.
What is it? Joseph?
In our Halloween special, I said that calling you my girlfriend sounded too childish.
Yeah, you also said that you'd find something else to call me.
And I have.
Like what, Joseph? What are you doing?
My partner lowered to one knee and took a ring from his pocket. It was simple, elegant, and beautiful.
From now on, I'd like to call you wife.
This is just so...
In the video we watched of the Polydors, I said that I was married to my work. But that's not true anymore. I'd rather be married to you.
Joseph, I don't think we can...
If our part in this story is truly coming to a close, I'd rather meet that end as your husband.
But we can't. I mean, how could we?
We have a church, a reverend, plenty of witnesses. I mean, your closest friend and maid of honor is also here. And of course, you're already wearing the dress. If those aren't enough signs, then...
Yes.
Yes, what?
I will marry you, Joseph. Today. Now. I don't know how much time I have left, but I want to spend it as your wife.
It was everything I could have wanted in a wedding, and not a single bit of it expected. Joseph took his place at the front of the church with Reverend Wright. Hardesty, rather hilariously, served as the flower girl. He rolled down the aisle, rotating continuously as he sprinkled flower petals. Ryan then escorted Carolyn up the aisle, where they parted, she moving to my side of the church, he to Joseph's. Keith and Sylvia followed after and did the same. Then I made my way down the aisle. I tried my best to do the traditional bridal walk, but it was just too slow and I all but dashed to the altar.
Welcome, loved ones. We are gathered here today to join Joseph and Lindsay in holy matrimony. Joseph, repeat after me, please. I promise to cherish you always, to honor and sustain you, in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth, and to be true to you in all things, until death alone shall part us.
Lindsay, I promise to cherish you always, to honor and sustain you, in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth, and to be true to you in all things until death alone shall part us.
Now, Lindsay, repeat after me.
Oh, I got it, Reverend.
Very well.
Joseph, I promise to cherish you always, to honor and sustain you in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth, and to be true to you in all things until death alone shall part us.
Lovely. Now I've been told that we will forgo the exchange of rings at this time, so by the power vested in me by the state of Indiana, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Joseph, you may kiss your bride.
And kiss me he did. Was this the first time? No. Was it the first of our new life together? Very much so. The old church had a bell tower that was somehow still in operation. Reverend Wright just couldn't help himself. He scampered excitedly to the old rope and gave it a couple of tugs, and so our nuptials were proclaimed with a resounding toll. But bells don't know the difference between happy occasions and sad. They make the same gong either way. It's only people who give these sounds meaning. So what are intended as celebratory chimes can just as easily become death knells.
Dr. Hardesty. And is that Mr. Leck there? Why are you both turned away? Face me, please. It's only polite. Oh, wait. Did the pair of you stay behind to slow us down so that the rest of your group could escape? How noble. But, as you've noticed, we have the place surrounded. So where's the rest of your gang? Down in the basement? Hello? Nothing? You won't even talk to me? Maybe it's me being rude. I know you both very well, but I haven't so much as introduced myself yet, have I? You can call me Troxell. It's a funny name, I know. If you can believe it, I had an even funnier name before that. But you know what I mean, don't you, Vulcanhorst? Names can be changed, but the people behind them, well, they stay the same. So why are you pretending to be something you're not, Hardesty?
All the world's a stage, and all the men and women barely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man, in his time, plays many parts.
The is this? Is this the bard? Mr. Leck, you tricky pulling a little switcheroo.
Ma'am, there is no one else in the building. They're gone.
Okay, Mr. Leck, I'm impressed. But your mistake was staying behind. I will make you tell me where Hardesty and the others are. In fact, by the time I'm done with you, you'll be begging for a bullet between your eyes.
We'll see about that.
Oh no, Mr. Leck. Please don't embarrass yourself. I know there's a lot of hype around you and Lindsay because of your podcast, but don't let it go to your head. Don't forget that at the end of the day, you're still just a man.
Actually, I'm not.
Shoot it! Shoot it! Shoot the ball! Get me out of here!
And the rest? You weren't supposed to kill anyone.
Would you have preferred instead our deaths?
This is the very ecstasy of love, whose violent property foredoes itself, and leads the will to desperate undertakings, as oft as any passion under heaven that does not afflict our natures. I am sorry.
Yes, what the middleman said.
Keep this phone with you. Cloak yourself and the bard. Go into hiding and await my instruction. If you don't hear from me, it means that I'm gone and you are free of your debt.
As you command.
I do bend my knee with thine, and in this vow do chain my soul to thine, and ere my knee rise from earth's cold face, I throw my hands, mine eyes, my heart to thee, thou setter up and plucker down of kings, beseeching thee, if with thy will it stands that to my foes this body must be prey, yet that thy brazen gates of heaven may ope, and give sweet passage to my sinful soul. Now, lords, take leave until we meet again, where'er it be, in heaven or in earth.
Have you finished?
What he bids be done if finished with his bidding.
In the course of this podcast, I have had not one, but two inhuman things come under my command.
Lindsay, what are you doing?
A voiceover. I need to explain what happened. As you've guessed, listener, you're getting a non-studio, from-the-road narration here. Depending on how Sylvia cuts this, the last thing you may have heard before the fight was Joseph and I getting married, then a knock at the door. That was the arrival of the non-man and the bard. Earlier, as soon as I learned that Grindel was free, actually, I'd sent for the non-man, emailing that account I'd gotten from Danny Wellever. I knew my message would be read in the computer room of a library in the small southern Indiana town of Cyboria. I directed the non-man to where he could find the bard, and ordered the monster to appear as me in 1940s fashions. That way, the robot would do as he said. I'd kept the two of them more or less on standby until summoning both of them to the old church with a phone call. But why did I do this, you wonder? Keith's fear that Sylvia had been followed eventually proved incorrect, but his instinct to then move on from the church was right on the mark. His gut told him that Heartland security was closing in and that we needed to vacate. But even if we left immediately and were gone before they arrived, our enemies would be hot on our heels. So I had set up a couple of decoys to slow them down, and from the sound of things, it worked. Well, as good as it could have. Our head start was a small one. We'd been away from the church for less than an hour before it was stormed by the Cabal. This is where you, listener, stopped me to ask how they found us, if not by following Sylvia. And no, it wasn't the ringing of the church bells that gave up our location. Hardesty has only just learned that it was him they tracked. Remember how Keith had asked Hardesty to put his eyes in the sky? Apparently he could, and had several times before, uplinked to a satellite, quietly commandeering it. Hardesty had turned its focus on our location, the aerial imagery giving him a godlike view of us. He was, obviously, looking for any indications of Heartland security, but saw none. Ironically, it was his search for them that led them to us. Apparently they had gotten wise to Hardesty's hacking of that particular satellite and were monitoring it, so when he focused on our location, he showed them exactly where we were. Even though we can't be totally sure of this, Hardesty says this is the only possible way they could have found us. But there is a positive here. Since they found us through Hardesty and not Sylvia, she was free to slip away with all of my field recordings, as well as those narrations I'd done in the basement, some more of which I'd made after the wedding. Sylvia had wanted to come with us, but knew that she couldn't. She'd promised to tell the story, to get it all out no matter what. If she was caught with me, no one would ever learn the truth. So, to that promise, she held true. She took the audio files, but gave me the backpack of recording gear. Then we embraced, tearfully, afraid this may be the last time we ever saw one another. Before she was out the door, however, Sylvia turned back with an idea. She told me to call Keith's burner phone and for us to leave it behind. I could stay on the line, to hear and record what happened at the church in our absence, that being the confrontation with Heartland and my decoys that you just heard. Reverend Wright was not long behind Sylvia. He had offered to go with us, but we declined. The fate of our little group is uncertain. And we need to be survived by people who will take up our work, in case this really is the end of the road for us. So, after saying a prayer of protection over us, he departed. Before the rest of us left the church, I asked Hardesty for a favor. Having seen him weld Joseph's gauntlets together, I knew he could take my shield, what was originally a breastplate, and fuse it back to the chest of the bard from whom we had taken it last season. I assumed that the robot would be in for a fight and that he would need his armor back, what I now knew to be bulletproof. I then bid the bard, and even the non-man, farewell. Then we were off. Like I said, our group was on the road for less than an hour before we heard the raid on the church. I had my phone on speaker and my field recorder next to it, getting the entire scene. This was the first we had heard from this Troxell woman. She sounded every bit as formidable as Piper had said she was. Hardesty had implored that she not be killed by the non-man or the bard. I hadn't wanted them to kill anyone, but I did specify her being spared. As you heard, Heartland hadn't left my decoys much choice but to defend themselves. So it was really just a happy accident that Troxell escaped. Her survival is somehow part of a plan that Hardesty is putting together, but so far he's not sharing it with the rest of us.
It has not yet been fully formulated.
Sure. So, now you have joined me in the present, listener. Like I said, I'm making this recording from the back of the van. We're on our way to what is the last place I want to go, to see the last person I want to see. But he may be the only one left who can help us against the Cabal. After the ambush at the church, Troxell has most certainly called in reinforcements. She's somewhere in the sky above us right now. It won't be long before we're spotted and she sends her army against us. Our plight is very desperate, the worst it's ever been. So it was decided, reluctantly, that to fight the Cabal, we'd go to their creator and now, arguably, their archenemy. Yes, for good or ill, we're on our way to Shady Hollow, not to fight the Traveler of Space and Time, but to ally ourselves with him. I just hope we're not making a terrible mistake. But you know what? Even if it is, it's the only mistake I've made today.
I love you, wife.
I love you, husband.
Don't forget to do the closer.
Of course. Do good. Fight evil. Repeat. I'm Lindsay Leck. I'm Lindsay Leck. And this is, for at least a little bit longer, the Endless Elsewhere podcast.